This is part 2 of the Epic of Gilgamesh. When we left the last piece, Hunter was upset because all of his traps, snares, and nets had been smashed and destroyed repeatedly. And so he went to his father, and his father said to him, "Hunter, only the wise may solve this problem. But first, you must go back and see if you can see what is causing this. So hide yourself and see who comes down to the water pool late in the evening when the sun is going down." So Hunter went back and hid in the bushes near the water pool, and when the sun was going down, he heard rustling, and he saw, to his horror, a huge, hulking, beast-like form that was human, but it was more beast-like, covered with hair, filthy, matted, bending down to get a drink of water. And Hunter couldn't restrain himself. He flinched and startled at the sight, and the creature looked up, and his eyes caught Hunter's, and Hunter was so frightened he leapt up and ran away. He went and told his father about the beast man that he had seen that was so frightening. Now, the name of this beast man happens to be Anke Do, and that is how we meet Anke Do in this story, is as he's crouched over drawing a cool drink of water at sunset. Hunter's father advised him to go to the nearby city of Uruk and ask the great King Gilgamesh for a solution. So Hunter went, and he came to the city, and the guard was at the gate, and he told the guard he wanted an audience with King Gilgamesh for a problem. That was the custom in those days. And the guards laughed at him, but they took him through to the audience room in the ziggurat, and there, finally, Hunter was escorted in to tell what was going on to King Gilgamesh. And King Gilgamesh was standing in the window, tall, broad, strong, long-legged, muscular, confident. He was shouting out the window at the workmen below, directing them, "Not that stone, that's red. I want orange there. Get a new team of oxen." He was very imperious and bossy, and everyone always did as he said. "What is it you want?" And then Hunter told him the story. And without even turning around, Gilgamesh said, "What you need to do is go to the street of the dancing girls. Find a young woman willing to go with you. Sit her on a blanket near the pool, and you will see Anke Do will be tamed." So Hunter said, "Yes, my king," and was about to leave when Gilgamesh turned to him and said, "Have you, by any chance, on the way here, have you seen anyone who looks like me, someone who resembles me, someone like similar to me?" And Hunter had to say, "No, my lord," and left. And Gilgamesh was sad because he's waiting for this friend to arrive. So Hunter goes down to the street of the dancers, and he finds a girl, and her name is Hottie, and he asks this young woman if she'll go with him to tame a wild beast in the countryside. And turns out Hottie is a very adventurous person and brave and interested, and so she goes with him, and they go back, and he seats her by the pool on a blanket. And that evening, Hunter hides nearby, of course. That evening, Anke Do comes down to get a drink, and Anke Do is leaning over to get a drink when he catches a smell he's never smelled before. It's like honey, it's like flowers, it's like delicious fresh breezes from the mountain. He doesn't know what it is, but he's very interested, so he searches around, and there on the other side of the pool he sees Hottie sitting on her blanket, and he goes over, creeps up to her, snarls at her, smells her, and she's speaking to him very kindly. Hottie sees something in Anke Do that maybe Hunter didn't see, and Hottie is talking nicely to him and patting the blanket, and she coaxes him to sit down next to her, and then she starts to comb out all of his tangled, matted, filthy hair, and pulling out the burrs and the twigs and all the debris, and she's talking to him and telling him all the things about the world and things that she knows, and she shares some of her lunch with him, and he doesn't even know how to drink out of a cup. He doesn't know how to eat a bowl of lentils. He doesn't know how to use his hands. He uses his face like an animal does, and she plays with him all day, and by the end of the day, once or twice, she puts a little kiss on his cheek and and compliments him, and Enkidu is in heaven. And then that night he goes back to his home in the hills with the wild animals, but he comes back every day. And pretty soon he lets Hunter come by and get close too, and the three of them get friendly, and over time Enkidu seems to begin to understand their language, and he knows how to do things, and they become friends, and he spends less and less time with the wild animals and more time with Hottie and Hunter. And one day Hottie said, why not go and visit the shepherds nearby? They gather every night at a campfire, and let's take Enkidu and we'll go there. And so they do, and that evening they arrive at the shepherd's camp, and the shepherds are astonished at the size of this person, and they kind of make fun of him, but he just sits and listens and eats and enjoys the fire. And then after he finishes, all of a sudden he speaks, and he's never spoken before, but he says, what do I need to do in order to sit here and eat this fine supper every night? So they're pretty astonished that he can talk, but he does. And they said, well, you could do what we do. And he says, well, what is that? And they said, well, we guard the sheep all day as they graze, and then at night we take turns staying up to kill all the predators that come around, try to devour our sheep, like the wolves and the lions and so forth. So Enkidu said, well, that's my job from now on. So Enkidu said, I can do that. I need very little sleep. So Enkidu takes over all the night duty and a lot of the day duty, and he's happy to kill lions and wolves, and he's good at it. He knows all their habits. He can talk to them, and he protects those flocks, and the shepherds grow to love him, which is very interesting. Well, this goes on for some time, and then Hottie says, you know, I really need to get back to my Street of the Dancing Girls. It's time for me to return home. It's been a fine adventure. And Enkidu says, I will go with you. So they set off, and Hunter's busy by then anyway. He's back to his traps and snares and nets. So off they walk down the road toward Uruk. And Uruk, again, is a major city in this Mesopotamian area. The big tall ziggurat dominates the sky. The walls are enormous. It's just a rich, incredible, thousands and thousands of people live there. It's an incredible city, not uncommon, not really different in some ways than the cities of our world today. But it was 6,000 years ago. That's the difference, in the middle of this beautiful valley. So Enkidu draws, everyone's attention as he walks along the road with little Hottie. He can't help it. He would be like one of our famous kind of basketball players today, just walking down the road with some regular person. So along the way, they come to the city, and Enkidu has to bend down to get into the city. And along the way, Hottie tells him about Gilgamesh, because he says, well, what is the king of Uruk like? Tell me. And Hottie tells him. Enkidu is upset by what he hears. Gilgamesh is not your kindly, fatherly king who does good and so forth. Gilgamesh is kind of predatory himself. He wants to conquer all the worlds around him. As soon as little baby boys could walk, he took them away and conscripted them into his armies. It was said he used the boys like arrows in a quiver. He doesn't care who dies and what happens as long as he gets what he wants. And he's cruel, and he is not a compassionate person. He's pretty unhappy, and he has been spending a lot of time thinking about getting married. And he's of the age where normally the kings would marry and start their families, and he can't find anybody he wants to marry, so finally he kind of decides he's going to marry the goddess Ishtar. So Hottie is telling Enkidu all about this, and Ishtar is the goddess of love in the Mesopotamian culture, but Ishtar is a vicious, kind of angry, murderous kind of goddess of love, and that might fit Gilgamesh to some degree, but Gilgamesh is thinking of the idea maybe he should marry a goddess and not just a human, and So this is what's going on in Uruk at the time, and Hottie tells Enkidu all about these things. And by the time they get to the gates, Enkidu is furious. He says he's never heard of such a terrible king, is not a father to his people, but a tyrant. He should be murdered. Enkidu is going to pound him into clay. Enkidu is going to beat him to a pulp. Enkidu is going to save the people of Uruk from this terrible king. And that's where he is when they arrive at the gates. Now they make their way through the city, and Enkidu is still very upset by what he's heard, and Hottie goes off to the street of the dancers and leaves him, and off Enkidu wanders toward the ziggurat through this city, which has got winding paths and roads and filled with people, and everybody stares at Enkidu. They've never seen a hairy, very hairy, beast-like man. And finally, he just happens, Gilgamesh is coming out of the ziggurat at the time, out into the courtyard, the big courtyard that's in front of the ziggurat, and Enkidu knows it's him right away because he's twice as tall as the other people. He's very big, and clearly this is Gilgamesh. And so Enkidu catches the eye of Gilgamesh, and obviously Enkidu is very angry, and Gilgamesh catches his eye. They recognize something in each other, and they rush toward each other, both excited and ready for battle. And so then they start to fight, and they fight, and they fight, and they fight. And as they fight, they throw each other around, and they smash through the areas where there's the pottery shops. They smash through the clothing areas. They smash through the dye pots. They just destroy all the things around the market square, and they don't stop, and they wrestle, and they wrestle, and they wrestle for a very long time, about an hour or maybe 2 hours, and then they fall to the ground sort of exhausted, and they rest for a while. And they realize, kind of simultaneously, that one cannot beat the other. So after they've rested, they sit up and they look at each other, and they lunge at each other again, but this time it's a hug of friendship, because Gilgamesh recognizes that Enkidu is come to be his friend, and Enkidu is there to take the place of loneliness for Gilgamesh, and he has found a similar person. He's found a friend. And then they play wrestle, and they put their arms around each other, and they hug, and they become best of friends. And then they go off, and Gilgamesh shows Enkidu the whole city, and he introduces him to everything that's going on there. And as they're wandering about, there's many carvings in what we call bas-relief in Uruk. That's the stone carvings that are sort of flat, that are placed on walls and temples and buildings, and they tell the history of the people. So all of the kings of Uruk had their deeds recorded in this way, just like in Egypt and other ancient civilizations. In Greece, they commemorate the events by putting up these stone pictures that are carved, beautifully made things. And he's showing all his ancestors and their deeds, and finally they come to a place where there's a very large wall, but Enkidu is asking Gilgamesh, he says, Gilgamesh, where are your deeds? And Gilgamesh says, well, this is my wall here, but it doesn't have anything on it yet. So there's a very large wall and it's blank. And he says, as soon as I finish and do adventures and do great deeds, the carvings shall be put here, he says, on the blank wall. And Enkidu is impressed by the size of the wall, and he wonders what kinds of deeds Gilgamesh is going to do. So they get to talking, and after some time has passed now, Gilgamesh comes up with an idea. And he says to Enkidu, I have an idea for my great deed. And Enkidu says, what is it? And he says, I'm not going to marry Ishtar. They've been talking about that. I've decided against that. Instead, I'm going to take up the quest to go and kill Huwawa. And Huwawa is the monster god who guards the cedar forests that are in the area of Mesopotamia, and he is a very jealous, angry giant who has killed everybody who ever tried to fight him. And Enkidu has actually seen Huwawa, whereas Gilgamesh has never seen Huwawa, but Enkidu has. And Enkidu says to Gilgamesh, you don't understand. I have been all over the country of our land. I have been on the road where the scorpion men are guarding the garden of the gods. I have seen Huwawa in his forest. No one can stand up against Huwawa. And Gilgamesh says, well, I'm going to try. I will go. I will do this great deed. Then I will chop down some of the cedars of his forest, and I will bring them back, and I will build a new temple with this beautiful cedar wood. And Enkidu is afraid, and he says that to Gilgamesh. He said, I am afraid. And Gilgamesh says, why are you afraid, my friend? Why are you afraid? And Enkidu says, because I might die. And Gilgamesh says, Enkidu, in this life it's do or die. We all die, Enkidu. Everyone dies. It's what you do. In the meantime, Enkidu, my friend, it's what you do. Do or die. Do and die. To get the bas-relief and the carvings on the wall, we must go and do great deeds. And I'm going to go to the armorer's house today, and I'm going to order 2 swords, 2 shields, and 2 bows and arrows to be made for us, special ones. Will you go with me, Enkidu, to do this great deed? And Enkidu says, yes, I will go, even though I am afraid. And that is the end of the second part of our story. Thank you for listening.